Hello everyone, my name is Oteli Edwards and I'm sitting in for Stephen Chia today, who is away on a filming assignment. Now, I'm a driver like many, and I confess to having lost my cool every now and then on the road. And it could be someone speeding up when I signal to filter into another lane, or it could be someone cutting into my path abruptly. I'm sure we've been there at least once. Recently, however, we've been seeing cases where road rage takes on a rather extreme tone. In fact, there was a viral video of a woman who jumped onto the bonnet of a car just this June. Now, her screams continued to be heard even from a distance as the driver drove off. The woman still clinging onto the hood for her dear life. And this follows another incident at Tuas Second Link last year where a woman violently ripped off a car's license plate as her son hurled vulgarities at the driver. Now, none of us are above road rage, but what causes it to turn so ugly? It seems normal to be a little impatient, but when does it tip over into the violent and aggressive emotions of road rage? And what can we do about it? That's our discussion on this episode of The Heart of the Matter. With me in the studio are Perlin Lim, Senior Clinical Psychologist at Promises Healthcare, and Clarence Lee, a driver and a cyclist, part of a cycling group named O5AM Cycling Group. Well, thanks for joining our podcast today. So I'm just going to start things off with you first, Clarence. I mean, you are an avid rider,
yes, I am.
Cyclist, and I've seen your Instagram. I was stalking you, and you've posted dozens and dozens of all these clips of you cycling and doing races. And
Right.
I'm sure you've had a lot of encounters with perhaps irate drivers or road rage. What is your worst encounter on the road where you felt perhaps a driver got too close to you? Maybe it hit you, maybe it didn't hit you. Help us understand your experience.
I'm a COVID cyclist, so I've been cycling for past 2.5 years. Usually when we cycle, it's always weekends, mostly Sundays, and we start like really early. We meet at 5 and then we would start our session. So there was this particular incident. We were in a peloton, sticking to the group regulations, as in not exceeding too many cyclists, going down Mandai, minding our own business, keeping to the left lane, all nice and cool, early in the morning, hardly any cars. And then there's this particular car that just swerved really, really close to us. And then he stayed by us for quite a bit. And then he was just trying to be funny, basically. Really close, but there were like 3 other lanes which were empty.
Were you worried at that point? It's 5 a.m. in the morning. Is this driver drunk or?
Possibly. We were worried what he was trying to do because within our peloton, we have female cyclists as well. So I was concerned. At the traffic junction, ironically, he was caught with the red light. So he had to stop at the traffic junction and all of us, the cyclists, all went by the side. I just went up to the driver's side. I said, "What were you trying to do? Were you trying to kill us? That was dangerous."
In that tone, or was it a few decibel levels up?
A disclaimer, I can't remember exactly how I said it. Maybe some Hokkien vulgarities are involved. I was trying to understand what was that all about. He rolled out the window, Hokkien vulgarities came out, he wanted to open the door, he wanted to step out, and then my mates had to come over to hold me back. Otherwise, it could turn ugly. That was one of the worst experiences I ever had in the past 2.5 years of cycling. It was really uncalled for, unnecessary. All of us were just minding our own business, just cycling. If any of us were inexperienced and didn't know what to do or panic, he or she would have crashed or clipped the wheels of the cyclist in front and could have, definitely crashed.
So, Perlin, I just want to sort of bring you in here. An incident like Clarence, where none of them seem to have solicited such a behavior or attention from the driver. And then we have the most recent incident where we saw the cyclist basically threw herself onto the bonnet of the car. I want you to go back to that very moment when you first saw that video. What was your first reaction to that?
My very, very first reaction to that was like, what happened? Because I don't really have the information about everything that was going down at that point. I watched that clip several times myself as well. Just from what I could see, I couldn't really tell what really was happening. There's no real definition of road rage per se, but if you think of it as a concept, we tend to refer to it like the thoughts, the emotions, the behavior that occur in response to a perceived unjustified provocation or threat to our safety. Of course, these behaviors could be a broad range of potentially risky behaviors that could endanger themselves or others. And there's so many different types of road rage behaviors and so many different factors that could contribute to how that anger is being elicited.
Before, I was going to cover this about road rage and I was talking to my cyclist friends, driver friends. And one of my friends who was basically hit gently by a car, again, like
Right.
sort of,
Right.
turning out of a lane. At that moment, you're so irate and angry. He said at that moment when you know that this person almost killed you, you could
Right.
have left a family of 2 or
Yep.
3 kids behind
Yeah.
and a wife. He said nothing this driver could have said, like, I'm sorry, could have done anything to get him out of that moment of rage.
That is definitely one of the things that make people angry, especially when they, again, perceive a threat to their own personal safety. It could be things like, hey, this person cut me off on purpose, or like, you could have killed me, or various violations, or people should watch where they're going. All sorts of things could contribute to that kind of response as well. But there are a lot of things. Things like personality types could play a role. External factors like the weather, or maybe they were already having a bad day, they were already having a stressful day to begin with, or even other personal factors like maybe generally they have poorer stress coping and emotion regulation methods. If you think about all these things in the first place, anger is an emotion that's definitely involved in these kinds of situations. But what gives rise to road rage is also involves the ability to manage that anger in that moment. So if you manage that anger very constructively in that moment, you might not see the road rage kind of behaviors coming on.
The University of Warwick says that women are more prone to signs of road rage. For instance, they change lanes without signaling, they violate all these stop signs and speeding. And Clarence, in your encounter and with all your friends, is that true?
As in female cyclists
Yeah.
displaying...
And drivers even?
Well, so far the bad experiences we've had is usually with male drivers, not necessarily female. I can't-
Interesting. And
can't say
actually,
for
you
sure.
brought something up earlier to say that because Clarence was a former bodybuilder and
I'm
he's
bulkier than
considerably
most
bulky.
Singaporean
and
males.
size matters, like when a driver wants to pick a fight with you and
They would think twice. So like the bad experience I was relating, as the driver wanted to step out, it was dark. And then when he realized that I was maybe like a size and a half bigger than him, he kind of like held back. But of course, my mates were holding me back as well. I am quite mindful because of me being more well-built than your average cyclist. I try to control myself and not get into any form of situation whereby it's going to be physically ugly or anything.
So, Pauline, do you think that women are more prone to road rage according to the University of Warwick in their findings?
Ironically, I think more incidences tend to involve young men. And again, there are a lot of factors that could go into this kind of things as well. Like, for example, if I look at some of the research done on road rage, there's also some correlations between like certain personality types and road rage.
Can you elaborate more on that?
For example, certain personality types can lend themselves to feeling anger more easily. Let's say people with antisocial, narcissistic, or even borderline personality types. They tend
And
to
you
have...
mean for the cyclist and the driver?
Yeah. I mean, anybody really, because these people may tend to have poorer coping abilities in the face of stresses, and they may be more likely to project their anger and frustration onto others or even blame them. Or they may also have what we call an inflated sense of self, and they may feel entitled to say like, hey, I should be given the right of way. Right. In general, these kinds of personality types do tend to be typical of men.
Interesting. Some netizens, they pointed out that COE should stand for Certificate of Entitlement, just picking up from what you're saying, essentially referring to the motorist's attitude and not so much the right to own or use a vehicle in Singapore. Clarence,
Agree.
as a cyclist/driver, I mean, do you think the entitlement lies in the driver?
Well, I'm a driver and a cyclist. I understand that thought from both camps, but in a way, a lot of drivers feel that way. The fact is, quite a number of drivers, they are quite ignorant of the certain rules and regulations. And a lot of them, they think, because cyclists, we don't pay road tax and COE, so we are not supposed to use the road.
But it's more sustainable, though, I have to say.
Yeah. And then from the cyclist point of view, road cyclists especially, because these bicycles are meant for the road and not PCNs. Quite a number of us, we feel like it's more dangerous to cycle on PCNs. We have your babies running around, your elderly, your joggers and all that. So for us road cyclists, we tend to take the road for sure, but we cycle in a safe way. And it's allowed. But
not everybody, though, Clarence.
Yeah.
Not every cyclist, I mean.
Yeah, it's legally allowed. But because of this misunderstanding from both camps, like how drivers think, okay, they don't pay road tax, so they have to get off the road. Whereas cyclists, we think, yeah, but traffic rules and regulations says we are allowed on the road. So what's your problem? So it's this conflict.
Do you think that should be considered when government dishes out or renews somebody's COE, that they should see what is your track record and whether you've been responsible
I think there's a lot
driver?
of lack of understanding and knowledge amongst the drivers as well as cyclists. So there's this huge gap. and conflict. And then the past 2 years, because of COVID, there's so many more cyclists on the road, and it created this angst and this anger between both camps.
Yeah.
And if the government don't step in to address and to highlight and to educate, I'm afraid it's going to get worse.
I
Yeah,
agree
and-
with education
Yeah,
though. I
education,
think
yeah.
in general, all road users, whether you're a cyclist or you're a driver, we are trying to coexist.
Exactly,
Right.
yeah.
And having a good understanding of the rules for everybody would be really, really good. Sometimes it's interesting because we see how in other countries, equally busy cities, with
Yes.
like a lot of cars on the road, etc. But they coexist so nicely because of the
The
presence
road
of
courtesy is there.
Yeah,
right?
road
I mean,
courtesy.
you give way to somebody, naturally put up your hand, say thank you.
Thanks.
So that's one of my peeve, Like
Yeah.
I'm giving way to somebody.
Yeah.
I've waited there for a while, not even like
Not
just
even
a hand up to say, hey, thanks.
Yeah, but I think that's also quite typical of the Singaporean culture. I mean, we do have the kiasu, kiasi kind of culture as well, where we perhaps could be a little bit impatient, and want to try to get ahead of things. So we kind of rush and we just go ahead with stuff as well.
And also,
Maybe.
Pauline, I mean, the fact that social media, to what extent do you think that plays a role and exacerbate the driver-cyclist relationship? Because, when things get posted
Yeah.
online,
Yes.
they get flamed, whether it's the driver or whether it's the cyclist, and it's like no end to it.
That one's a little bit tricky. You only see certain more extreme acts of violence or anger in the news, right? You don't see the typical smaller, minor conflicts or minor annoyances featured as much. So you actually see the more serious cases out on the news, and then people are like, hey, how come it's like this and how come it's like that? It draws more extreme views in general.
Right. What are some of the early signs of someone who is susceptible to road rage?
So many things, to be honest. Let's say, for example, if I was a person who was generally impulsive or short-tempered, I have a quick fuse, I could get angry more easily, right? And then I may be more likely to behave aggressively or impulsively when faced with a stressor. Or if just in general, if let's say I have very poor stress coping mechanisms or stress management, then being in such a situation where, of course, this could be quite stressful for me, I may not be able to handle things well.
Yeah.
So many things that could really contribute to
and
such
so,
things.
Clarence, I'm wondering, you've had a number of encounters with impatient drivers and whatnot.
Yep.
Have you found a coping mechanism so that your friends don't need to be holding you back? And I'm thinking like, what is it, 5 or 6 guys?
Right,
like, trying to...
I practice martial arts. I can calm myself down, but my mates just want to be sure, so they just want to step in and make sure that nobody gets hurt. Generally, I'm calm all the time when I'm cycling. The reason why I got really pissed off back then was because my friends, their personal safety was endangered. Yeah, my mates, my female cyclist friends, I was pissed at that point in time, and my anger got the better of me. I went to the driver. I was outraged that my friends' lives were endangered.
I want to just talk about whether the weather has anything to do with road rage, because based on some of the psychologists, including one of them called Stuart Basman, he says that hot weather actually fuels road rage because there are more road rage incidents in the summer months.
Definitely possible. Given Singapore's climate, we're in the hot weather all the time, right? It's kind of like summer all year round. It tends to make us potentially more irritable, for example. You're sweaty, you're hot, you're just feeling really icky and all that. It's not necessarily a nice state to be in. And you can get quite physically uncomfortable. And so when we are uncomfortable, we can be more irritable as well. So whenever we perceive something that, again, in that moment itself is kind of like, hey, what happened here? What's going on? It could just kind of be that little thing that tips you over sometimes.
Yeah.
So the weather is definitely one of those factors that can contribute. But that being said, it's not definitely the only contributing factor. I could be under perfectly hot sun, and if I'm able to regulate my emotions quite well, it doesn't mean that I will display road rage.
Like, the other recent incident was at the Causeway, right? Where the woman driver, she was cutting to someone else's lane, or she was so angry with the other driver that she ripped out his license
License
plate and then threw it. And then the son was involved. And after that, I think she came out saying that, basically she was trying to protect her son.
Right.
I'm also wondering, because we've got more in-cameras built inside the car? Is there really an increase in the number of road rage incidents, or because of the cameras that we have now?
Actually, I don't think it would be because of the cameras. Of course, the cameras provide context to whatever the situation was, right? That's how we see what has happened. But at the same time, I think cameras make it less likely that a person remains anonymous. In general, if a person thinks that they can be anonymous, then they may be a bit more daring in showing and displaying some of this anger.
But you see, for instance, like the cyclist that jumped on the bonnet and the other lady, they knew that people whipping out their phones.
Right.
It was almost as
Yeah,
if like
but-
they blanked out that there are all
but
these
of course,
cameras
yes. So
around.
the thing about anger is that it never jumps from like say 0 to 100 straight away. It rises, right?
Right.
So if it's something that really reaches that boiling point really quickly, like it just goes up all the way up, right? You'll probably reach one point where you're like, okay, you know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna just do whatever I need to do in this moment, or whatever I think I need to do. So in that moment, because I'm so angry, I just act without necessarily thinking through it.
What are your top tips then? Clarence here is martial arts, so it teaches you to somehow like be water or whatever. what Bruce
Be
Lee
like
said.
water.
Or be like water.
Right.
Yeah, what are the top tips
For the driver?
before it gets up to 100? When you're around 20 or 30 and you know it's building up.
Wait, from which perspective? The one who is the victim of road rage or the one who's getting angry?
But that's the thing. I think
I think
both sides
both,
feel
right?
that.
Yeah, both
you
sides.
know,
Both feel like they're victimized or
Correct.
they were
Yeah.
unfairly treated in some way. Usually cyclists would feel, but drivers could feel that way as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the main thing I would say is know that we're all humans, right? So things could be happening. Like, let's say if somebody just cuts through your lane. Of course, it's not the nicest experience. Like, this person cuts into your lane and like goes off, and I'm like, but at the same time, I could be like, hey, wait a minute, maybe this person is in a rush somewhere. I don't necessarily have to react to that.
Yeah, somehow
what I'm
actually, I
saying
kind
is-
of use that saying like whenever there's a driver that just, goes by really quickly.
We
I
don't
say,
have to consider that drivers are always malicious in their intent.
Actually, on cycling, right, I don't ever have a split second where I think nice things about drivers when they do something bad,
You've mentioned that how cyclists and drivers, they need to have a better understanding.
for sure.
If you could go to the Land Transport Authority tomorrow or speak to the Cycling Association, Drivers Association, what would that list be? What are the 3 things that you would want to put in there to improve that current relationship?
I think education first,
For sure.
to
Yeah,
have
number
a
one.
very good understanding of the rules for both cyclists and all motorists.
Yeah.
Because I think at the end of the day, we're all trying to use the road. We're all trying to coexist nicely on the
But
road.
that's the thing, Pauline, we all kind of know. The basic thing is don't put someone else's life in danger,
Yes,
no matter
of course,
what.
of course.
Yeah.
But I think also, hopefully with things like, say, more cyclist lanes and things that could demarcate areas for safe cycling as well as for safer driving, that would be something good in the future as well. There are other countries like Amsterdam or New York City. They are really, really busy cities, and we see very dedicated cycling lanes and everyone's really
Yeah.
very zen
Yeah.
and very chill about it.
Okay.
Even in
Clarence,
Tokyo,
yeah.
my wife is Japanese, so I was in Tokyo for 2 months late last year. So I was cycling almost every day. And then even in a city as busy as Tokyo with your Shinjukus and your Shibuyas and whatnots, right? Cycling lanes are there. No issues with drivers whatsoever. They coexist in harmony.
So
Totally.
just common road courtesy, just
Yeah,
right,
definitely.
having that etiquette when you're on the road.
Yes.
For me, I always treat it as if there's a cyclist in front of me. I always treat that cyclist like it's a car.
That's a human being right there.
Oh,
Yeah, of course.
I try.
But I would also
Yeah.
say, I'd like to just add, I think it's also important for us to be responsible. If you want to try to prevent yourself from potentially getting into situations that could make you angry, like say, for example, don't just time your trips so that if I know it takes me 20 minutes to make this journey, I only give it 20 minutes. Have better time management around it so that if something unexpected comes up, you don't feel so impatient, you don't feel so rushed, and then you feel like, I need to rush ahead. Because sometimes I think with certain situations, it becomes like, hey, speed is the priority, and then that may give rise to erratic driving patterns, which then could give rise to the road rage incidents that we do see. So I think on our own, there are also things that we can do.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all these pointers with us. So thank
Right.
you,
Thank you
Clarence.
so much.
Thank you.
Pauline.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to my guests who have taken the time to come talk to us. And also thanks to you, our listeners, who follow our podcast. If you have views on this topic or any other topic, please feel free to write to us. Leave us a review on any of the major podcasting platforms where Heart of the Matter is available. And thanks to the CNA podcast team, Jacqueline Chan, Joanne Chan, Tiffany Ang, Gretel Teo, Tsai Ye Win, and Crispina Robert. I'm Otelli Edwards, signing off.